Okay, should work. Okay, so yeah, we're now on the biology track, or at least the first talk, though they'll be intermingled later. And so I wanted to say a couple of words about computational fabrication in the context of biology, or maybe biology in the context of computational fabrication. So the computational side of this, there's a huge opportunity because it's just nascent. It's like really underdeveloped. So anybody who is interested in building computational tools, biology is like the endless frontier. So I definitely encourage people to go into that. So the tools need to be built. On the fabrication side, biology is kind of the master of fabrication. And so we can take a lot of inspiration from biology and also just think about where we might want to sculpt or guide biology to go in the future in terms of fabricating things that maybe are not or haven't evolved. And the interesting thing about biology, from my perspective, is that it's totally non-intuitive from what we normally think about in terms of human scale fabrication, which we think of usually top down, right? By the time most of us are a few years old, we've already engaged in top-down fabrication, usually of wood blocks or Lego or something like that. It's a bit different to think about things building themselves. And one way to think about it, if we were to fabricate like biology does, what would that look like? I think you could do this thought experiment, which is kind of fun. And I'm just going to borrow a quote from one of the best communicators in the life sciences, David Goodsell, from one of his books. He says, "Imagine throwing a collection of fenders, engine parts, nuts and bolts, wheels and axles into a swimming pool and then expecting a functional car to drive out." So that's how, and he says, that's basically how biology builds. It self-assembles. But if we take this thought experiment a little bit further, what would it look like if we actually built that pool? And this is a way to actually think about what biology has to do, and in fact does. So if you just threw everything in the pool and it just sunk to the bottom, you wouldn't ever get a car on any reasonable time scale. So things need to move around a lot. They have to run into each other so they have a chance to assemble into the right position. The parts should probably stick to each other in general. So like when you imagine if the axle and the wheel come together, the wheel needs to stay in place when it finds the right spot. So things should be sticky in general. But then once you make things sticky, they can probably come together in the wrong way. So you need a way for them to come back apart if it's not correct. And somehow, come together in the right order so they stick well enough, but not too much. It's like you start adding a lot of complexity in this kind of magic swimming pool. But actually, when you study a little bit of biology, you see that all of this stuff is true. Like it's literally happening in all of our cells all the time. So then you start thinking about, how do you build with these rules? And we can start looking to great artists and animators like David Goodsell, who have really nicely kind of unpacked and abstracted a lot of interesting things in the known biology and explained them. So here's a watercolor painting of an E. coli that he did. And I'm going to couple this with a cool coarse grain simulation. So most biology textbooks are just static, or pretty much all of them are static. But what's actually going on is, these sticky things are moving around really fast and bumping into each other and sticking to themselves and to each other. And so this little simulation gives you an idea of maybe you can kind of picture what's going on inside of cells. So that's how biology, well, I'm not really explaining anything, but just making you aware that biology builds itself. And then if we start thinking about fabrication in this kind of interesting magic swimming pools of the cell, we can think about different opportunities for new types of fabrication, and then the need for software to help us design that. So one is just new materials, and actually in Goodsell's book, he talks about this kind of hypothetical enzyme that could make carbon nanotubes. Just, like we could scalably produce carbon nanotubes and maybe build space elevators and stuff like that, or just, really interesting computers. So that's one thing that, if we could master computational fabrication of biomaterials, we could build stuff like this. We need new foods, not necessarily here on Earth, but when we colonize Mars, we're going to need to plant crops like people who colonize other planets will need to eat. And we need to engineer foods for them to be able to grow and not wait a million years for them to evolve. So if we can figure out how to build with biology, we'll need to be able to do that. So that's something to think about. So many challenges, many things for people to work on. In the more near term, and I'm pivoting now to today's speakers, we can already repurpose and engineer a lot of interesting computation from biology. And so going back to the E. coli example, biological cells and organisms need to be able to eat and avoid predators. They need to be able to sense their environment. And these sensors are built out of these nanomaterials that we can actually take out of biology and move into useful devices. And so so one of our talks is going to be along the line of biosensors and actually, in commercializing the concept of sensing our environment for useful things. Another angle is biological structure. So, and you'll hear later in the day from a representative of Bolt Threads, who's, and I'll let Mitch tell you about that, but just a pointer to many inspiring examples of architecture in nature, and we can actually take those materials and make them more useful for things that humans want to do. So that's my advertisement for the remainder of our talks, and then hopefully the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's available to study in biology. And I just want to encourage people to, if you're interested in this, read, talk to people who are already in biology and collaborate with them. And if you're young enough or you're talking to mentoring people, please encourage them to cross-train and sort of study biology, because we need more people that understand computer science and biology to build all this stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carlos for our first biology track talk. Thank you.